G'day guys, this is Tyrone and welcome back to another Fallout 76 video. In today's one I'm going to be sharing some info that the data miners would like to be more common knowledge. This is everything you need to know about the weak spots and the tough spots of each enemy within the game. Let's get into it. So what is a weak spot and what is a tough spot, you may ask? It's very simple really. If you either free aim at an enemy's specific body part or use concentrated fire to target specific body parts in VATS, you would have noticed that sometimes targeting certain limbs or body parts of different enemies would yield either higher damage or make you do less damage. Weak spots being the body part on an enemy that makes you do more damage when it is targeted, and tough spots doing the opposite, making you do less damage when it is targeted. And in this video I'm going to be detailing with irrefutable proof of exactly which enemies can be affected in this way and how much extra damage you do to these certain enemies. Before I start with that though, it is important to know a few things. Not all enemies have a weak spot and not all enemies have a tough spot. So you'll have to do some mental gymnastics to try and remember what enemies need to be shot where to deal the largest amount of damage. So feel free to return to this video if you're ever in need of a quick refresher. It's also important to take note that the weak spot system isn't very consistent in this game. When you're hitting a weak spot, the damage numbers should pop up as yellow. However, due to the inconsistency in this game, this seems to only happen when you are shooting at an enemy's head, which is not the weak spot in all cases. Sometimes the head can even be the tough spot on an enemy and you'll be doing less damage while targeting the head. Yet the numbers will still be yellow, giving a false sense of success to the player. So yes, be sure to keep that in mind that the yellow number doesn't always equal more damage. I've also got to make it clear before starting that the player will always be doing 100% baseline damage to every limb or body part, unless it is specified otherwise. So for any limbs that are not mentioned as weak spots or tough spots, you are just doing regular base 100% damage, which means that your damage is not increased or decreased in any which way due to the limb you're shooting at. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into the guide. The information tables on screen are taken directly from the Fallout 76 wiki, and any enemies not shown on this list throughout the video do not have a weak spot or tough spot and are therefore omitted. Remember, when looking at this list, as I said earlier, we already do 100% base damage to each limb, so the numbers you see on the table are the total damage we do to the specific limb with this extra damage taken into account. So while it might say we do 125% damage to a target's head, for example, that doesn't mean we do 125% extra damage to a target's head. That simply means that we do 25% extra damage that is already existing on top of the 100% base damage we already do to each enemy's limb. And for the tough spots, the percentage that is on the table is showing the amount of damage that you will now be doing when targeting that specific limb. For example, if it were to say 33%, that would mean that we are only dealing 33% of the damage we could be dealing elsewhere, basically reducing our damage by 67% from that 100% baseline. I hope that I've covered that properly. If you have any questions on how the damage there works for the tough and weak spots, feel free to ask below, I'll try to explain more clearly, but I think I've covered that good enough, so let's get into it. Firstly, we have the angler. The angler has a weak spot, which is its head. When you are targeting the head, you will be dealing 25% extra damage, as that is its weak spot. Then we have the Assaultron. This is our first enemy on the list with a tough spot, and no weak spot of any kind. Its tough spot is its head, so while targeting its head, as you can see from the table below, we will be dealing 33% damage as opposed to 100% damage like normal, which is basically a 67% damage decrease. So that means you should aim literally anywhere else, be that the torso, arms, legs, or combat inhibitor. This whole thing right here also counts for the imposter sheepscorch, so keep that in mind. Next is the attack dog, which I assume counts for all other regular dogs as well. The attack dog has a weak spot at its head where you will be dealing an extra 100% damage increase while targeting at the head. Next up is a beaver. Its weak spot is its head, surprise surprise, and while targeting the head you will be dealing an extra 25% damage. Then we have the bloatfly, which has a weak spot on the head. While targeting the head you will gain an extra 100% damage. Then, similarly, the bloodbug. Same here as the bloatfly. While targeting the head you will deal 100% extra damage, as that is its weak spot. Then up next we have the Brahmin, which has a weak spot of 2 heads. And while targeting either one of these heads you will deal 50% extra damage. Then we have the cargo bot. These are the flying robots that hold the cases for the nuclear keycards, and they actually have two different weak spots. If you target any of the boosters, you will deal 100% extra damage, and if you target the flight control system panel, you will deal 25% extra damage. Next up we have a Deathclaw. You might be surprised to find out that the Deathclaw does have a weak spot as well as a tough spot. The weak spot is actually its belly, which can be hard to hit outside of VATS due to collision issues, but while targeting the belly, specifically in VATS, you will deal 100% extra damage. The tough spot, however, is its tail. If you target its tail, you will deal 50% less damage than normal. And obviously, aiming at any other limbs will not yield any bonus damage or reduced damage, as I've explained at the start, so yeah, just go for the belly. Then next we have the eyebot. Now, because these things are easier to kill, you might assume that they don't have anything here, but they actually do. They have a tough spot and a weak spot. The weak spot is its back panel, where you deal an extra 200% damage if you target it. Meanwhile, if you target its mounted laser weapon, you will deal only 25% damage, which is a 75% damage decrease. Then we have feral ghouls. All feral ghouls have a weak spot at the head. If you target the head, you will deal 100% extra damage, which is very nice. Then we have the weakest enemy in the game, the firefly. For whatever reason, this has a weak spot, but anyway, sure, whatever. When targeting the firefly's head, you do 50% extra damage. Like we needed that. Then next we have the Flatwoods monster. While targeting this alien creature's head, you will gain 25% extra damage. Similarly, we have the fog crawler. While targeting this creature's head, you gain 25% extra damage. And then we have the fox. It says that when you target its head, you deal an extra 25% damage. Next up is the grafted monster, with its only weak spot being its blowholes. It's recommended that you target them inside of VATS since they are nearly impossible to hit while free aiming. But while targeting the blowholes, you deal an additional 100% damage to the target, which is very nice. Then we have Gulpers, Captain Noob's favourite creature. They have the same weak spot as almost everything else on this list. You guessed it, the head. While targeting the head, you will deal 50% extra damage to the target. And then we have the Hermit Crab, which is a bit different. It does have a weak and multiple tough spots. The tough spots being its claws and arms. And if you target them here, you will be doing 50% less damage. Also, its huge vehicle-like shell, if you target this, you will do pretty much 0 damage to the Hermit Crab. The silver lining being, if you target its face, you will deal an extra 50% damage to it. So yeah, be careful where you aim for this one. Next up is the Honey Beast. The weak spot here is its head. While targeting the Honey Beast's head, you will deal 100% extra damage. Then we have humans. Humans of all kinds, Mothman cultists, Blood Eagles, raiders, settlers, and whatever other wasteland wankers are wandering around this place, including other players. While targeting the head of a human, you will deal 100% extra damage than normal. Next we have the Mega Sloth. This kind creature will take 25% extra damage if you target its face, as that is its weak spot. Then we have Mirelurks. The regular Mirelurk variants have a weak spot and a tough spot. The weak spot being the face for 100% extra damage, and the tough spot being the shell and claws. If you target the shell, you will do 75% less damage than normal, and if you target the arms or claws, you will do 50% less damage than normal. Then we have the Mirelurk Hunter, which pretty much has the same setup. If you target the face, you will deal 50% extra damage than normal, whereas if you target the claws, you will deal 67% less damage than normal. Next up is the Mirelurk King, with only one weak spot, and no tough spots surprisingly. The weak spot being the head. When you target here, you will be doing 100% extra damage to the target. Then we have Big Bertha, the Mirelurk Queen. This creature has no weak spots, only tough spots. The Mirelurk Queen's tough spots are the arms and the shell. If you target the arms, you will deal 50% less damage than normal, and if you target the shell, you will do 75% less damage than normal. And while the Mirelurk Queen does not have a weak spot, it is recommended that you try and cripple its legs so that it becomes incapable of movement. Next up we have Mole Miners. These weird humanoid creatures have a weak spot at the head. If you target the head, you will deal 100% extra damage to them. And in similar fashion we have Mole Rats, with the exact same weak spot and the exact same damage extra value, that being 100% extra damage while targeting the face. And then we have the Mothman. This cryptid creature's weak spot is its head, and if you shoot its head, you will deal 25% extra damage to it. Then next up we have the Mr. Handy robots. This includes the Mr. Gutsy and the Ms. Nanny variants as well. These robots have 3 separate weak spots. The first one being the combat inhibitor. If you target here, you will deal 100% extra damage to the target. The second being the thruster. Again, if you target this, you will deal 100% extra damage. Then finally, we have its eyes. Targeting any of the 3 protruding eyes will make you do 25% extra damage to the target. Up next is the mutant hounds. These sick pups have a weak spot in the head. Shooting there will grant 25% extra damage to the target. Then next up, for whatever reason, we have possums. These critters have a weak spot that is also in the head. Shooting here will grant 25% bonus damage. Next up is a rare creature called an owlet. This little flightless bird does have a weak spot, that being also the head, granting 25% extra damage when you target it. Then we have protectrons. These slow-moving robots actually have no weak spots, but they do have one tough spot, that being its head. If you target a protectron's head, you will deal 67% less damage than normal. And this is a prime example of that yellow number nonsense being misleading, because if you shoot this robot in the head, you're dealing less damage, yet the game rewards you with the visualness of the yellow numbers to mislead the player into thinking that they're doing extra damage, which they obviously are not. They're doing 67% less damage if they target the protectron's head. Anyways, moving on. Next up we have rad scorpions, with both a weak spot and a tough spot. The weak spot being its face. If you shoot here, you'll deal 100% extra damage than normal. However, if you target its tough spot, the claws, you will deal 50% less damage than normal. Then we have an interesting one that I'm betting a lot of you didn't know about. This is the rad stag. And you might just think, well, yeah, I'll do extra damage if I shoot it in the head. And yes, you are correct, but you actually do gain different damage bonuses depending on which head you aim at. I know, it's strange, but anyway. If you aim at the left head, you will deal 25% extra damage than normal. However, if you aim at the right head, you will deal 100% extra damage than normal, which I find very bizarre, but hey, who am I to judge? Then next up we have the Robobrain. This one deceptively has no weak spots, only one tough spot, and that tough spot is actually its head, which I think doesn't make much sense, but whatever. If you shoot at a Robobrain's head, you will be doing 20% less damage than normal, so yeah, just aim anywhere else. And then we have the squirrel. Not that these critters need a weak spot or anything, but here they are. If you target a squirrel's head, you will do 25% extra damage than normal. And then up next, we have the apex predators of Appalachia, the Scorch Beast. They do have one weak spot, and surprisingly, no tough spots. The weak spot being the head. If you target the head, you'll be doing 50% extra damage than normal. And this is the same for the Scorch Beast Queen as well, just to be clear, so yeah, keep that in mind. Then we have the human Scorched. They have the same weak spot as every other humanoid in the game, the head. If you target the head, you'll be doing 100% extra damage. And now we have the Sentry Bot. This big bad fucker has the most vulnerable weak spot in the game, as well as one semi-tough tough spot. The weak spot being the fusion core. When you target the fusion core in VATS, or if you get lucky with the free aim, you will be dealing 1900% extra damage than normal, which is a guaranteed one-shot in most cases, so yeah, definitely try and aim for the fusion core. Meanwhile, its tough spot is its head. If you target the head, you will deal 20% less damage than normal. So yeah, with robots it seems to be the general consensus that you should not be aiming at their heads, because for every single one of them now, you do less damage. Next up is the Sheep Squatch. This thing has no weak spots, however it does have one significant tough spot that you should be aware of. The tough spot being its entire torso. If you target here, you will be doing 67% less damage than normal, which is pretty massive since its torso makes up a large percentage of its body. So yeah, just aim for the arms, legs, or the head, doesn't matter as long as you're not shooting the torso. Then we have super mutants. Super mutants of all types, including the behemoths, have only one weak spot with no tough spots. The weak spot being the head, where you will deal an extra 100% damage than normal. So yeah, always go for the dome on these green bastards. Next up is the Snallygaster. This thing has a weak spot, that being its head. If you target here, you will deal an extra 50% damage than normal. Then we have the Stingwing. Their head is their only weak spot. Targeting here will make you do 100% extra damage. And then we have the Tick. Same thing here, its weak spot is its head, and targeting there will grant 50% extra damage. Then we have Bubble Turrets, and surprisingly this only affects Bubble Turrets in particular, doesn't affect any other types of turrets, so yeah, keep that in mind. But anyway, they have no weak spots, only one tough spot, that being what is called its body, which I'm assuming is going to be called its chassis in actual game. but yeah, targeting there will make you do 50% less damage than normal. Then we've got the wild mongrels. Their weak spot is their head, and targeting there will grant you 100% extra damage. Up next is the Wendigo. They have one weak spot and no tough spots. The weak spot being their head, and shooting here will grant 25% extra damage than normal. And then we have the big bad Wendigo Colossus, which also includes Earl Williams, so keep that in mind. But yeah, the Wendigo Colossus have no tough spots and 3 weak spots, the weak spot being all 3 of its heads. Hitting any of the heads will grant a 100% damage increase. Then we have wolves. Similarly to the other canine on the list, they also have a weak spot being the head, and when you shoot there, they take an extra 100% damage. And then finally on this list, for the last creature, we have the Yaoguai, with no tough spots and 1 weak spot. That being its head, targeting here will grant you 25% extra damage than normal. Oh fuck, reading out that list got real repetitive real fast. Sorry about that, but I figured I should add some verbal context alongside each creature. But yeah, anyways guys, this is every single humanoid and creature in the game so far that has been documented to have a tough spot and also a weak spot. So if there is any creature or enemy not shown on this list, then like I said at the start, it is omitted, and you will deal the same amount of damage regardless of what body part you are targeting. So yeah, I hope you all learned at least one thing by watching this video. I for one did not know about the Rad Stag or the Robobrain before I started making this video, so yeah, that's something that I learned. This has been every enemy's weak spot and tough spot. A massive shout out to all my current Patreons, thank you all so much for your continued support on the channel. If you'd like to have your name at the end of each video and some other cool bonuses, then be sure to check that out in the description, along with my other social medias. And be sure to subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed. I've been Tyr, and I'll catch you in the next one. Welcome to Valhalla.